You're listening to Permission To, the podcast where we dive into the science and soul of owning your worthiness as a perfectly imperfect human being. I'm your host, Sam Dew, psychotherapist, positive psychology coach, mama to a beautiful 5-year-old Amelie, and passionate advocate for living an inspired life. My aim is to show you that you have full permission to own your worthiness so that you can embrace your true nature and begin walking boldly toward your dreams. Let's dive in. My guest on today's podcast is the incredible Annie Gichuru. Annie is the founder of Uplifting Studios, a platform dedicated to supporting online business owners to build culturally and racially diverse, inclusive and equitable businesses. Annie is also the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Coach and consultant for the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, where she supports trainees and coaches. She's deeply passionate about representation through a racial justice lens and is an internationally certified life coach supporting migrant women of colour. In this conversation, Annie and I dive into all things permission to be a genuine ally. We cover understanding what an ally truly is, understanding the difference between equality and equity, knowing where to start when it comes to being an ally, and how to become a genuine ally, an advocate for people of colour. And Annie shares lots of wonderful mindset tips and tools for someone who desires to be more of an ally, but perhaps has fears around getting it wrong. I know that Annie's life experience and professional experience will be so supportive and valuable to you. She is an absolute expert in this area. And yeah, I just know that you're going to get so much out of this conversation. Let's dive in. Annie, I would love for you to share a bit about your personal journey and how you came to be such a leader in the diversity and equity space.
First and foremost, thank you so much for having me, Sam. I'm so excited to be here. Getting into this space, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I feel kind of found me. I wasn't looking for it. I feel like it kind of found me. So I've been calling Australia home for more than 20 years, originally from Kenya in East Africa, and came here as an international student. Got into a degree, mass communication back then is what we used to call it, and just had this deep desire to get into television. But at the time, Sam, there weren't any people, Black people or people of color on television. And so I remember getting a work experience gig at one of our major national television stations. And it was such a great opportunity. Absolutely loved the time I was there, and was even offered the opportunity to return if I wanted to. And I remember just thinking to myself, this would be fantastic, but also second guessing myself and having major self-limiting beliefs and feeling like I can't do this because there aren't other people who look like me and sound like me. And also back then, my Kenyan accent was a lot stronger than it is today. And I just wondered, how would that work out for me in a television station? And so I quickly changed gears and got into HR and did that until I became a mom for the first time. And that's when the desire again to get back into media and television kept calling me. And I created a documentary series that did pretty well, sharing about good news stories, and got picked up for television on Foxtel in Australia, New Zealand. And last year in my home country of Kenya, it got picked up there as well. And that's what somehow led me into DEI, wanting to share more of our stories, our, people of color, and sharing our stories of rising, because I think our stories have been very much told from a lens of lack, a lens of, poverty and sickness. And for those of us who come here, perhaps we're coming here for greener pastures. And whilst there is that story for those who do come here for those reasons, there are other reasons that have led others to come here. You know, the international student who has come here, doing really well and making a difference and adding on to the Australian economy. Those stories are not often told. And so I felt, especially becoming a mother and wanting to have that representation shown and shared from a positive light. And given my experience in HR and having worked with, you know, diversity and inclusion with different organizations in the private sector and in the public sector, I felt that I was in a unique position now becoming a coach, having become a coach, that this was something unique that I could bring into the industry where we, again, do not see much representation when it comes to people of color. And also just that lack of understanding of how can you serve people who come from diverse backgrounds, you know, culturally and racially as well. And I felt I was in a really unique and good position to be able to serve my peers in this space in that way, you know, other online business owners.
Yeah, I think I absolutely see you as a leader. So I'm so grateful that you're here to share your wisdom and your learning. And it's so inspiring to see someone who, I guess, who's faced those challenges and those experiences, but with a lens of strength, you know, like really focusing on your strengths and what you could actually bring to Australia and really changing those stories. So happy to have you here. So I always say there's no such thing as a silly question, as the saying goes. And so I think, you know, there are probably some people listening to this podcast who might not really know what an ally is. And this is all about permission to be a genuine ally. So, you know, whilst it might sound like a silly question, can you explain what an ally is?
Yes. So an ally in the context of, you know, being an ally to people of color, and really just giving it a little bit more context there for your listeners, Sam, you know, an ally coming from the lens of, you know, racial equity. When you understand that when it comes to people of color, that there is a lot of inequity when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to access to, you know, the things that perhaps, you know, white folks may have, but, you know, there are barriers and challenges that face people of color. So being an ally in that context is being able to stand in solidarity, you know, understanding that those challenges are there. I see them, I understand them, and I want to be a person who helps to dismantle such systems. I want to stand in solidarity and support my friends, community of people of color, so that together we can rise. I think there has often been a misconception that when marginalized groups are, you know, missing out, that it's just them, Sam, who are losing. But I truly believe that if there's any inequity that is happening around us, we are all losing out.
That's absolutely true, isn't it? And what do you think? Do you think that part of being an ally is also like owning our white privilege and acknowledging that?
Oh, Sam, that is a huge topic, you know, white privilege. I think that in itself would require an entire podcast session on its own. But I think it's understanding it. And that's a topic, you know, that is quite fragile, and people get really uncomfortable because it comes from a place of probably not fully understanding what white privilege is, and thinking, well, I've had to work really hard to get to where I am. I haven't been really handed anything, it's been difficult. It's not like I have all these resources, I'm trying to make ends meet just like any other person. But I think white privilege is the fact that you've never had to be discriminated against because of the color of your skin. That's not something that's been a barrier for you in your life. And so that becomes a privilege, a white privilege.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It is a very kind of sensitive and complex topic, but I think it does come with part of the role of being an ally, doesn't it?
It does.
And it's
It does.
kind of that inner work that I think sometimes we can feel a little bit scared to do around actually like really looking at our lives and where we have had it maybe experienced some privilege that we might not have realized at the time or
Yes, I think you're very right. Being an ally is, recognizing that you do have that privilege and you can potentially make things a little bit easier for people of color. Where could you potentially open a door? Where could you potentially, speak up and challenge how things are done? Where could you give opportunities? So yes, it's recognizing that privilege does exist, or you're in a position to help, and in doing so as standing in solidarity and advocating for as well.
Yes. And that leads really nicely into equity. So how would you define equity?
I love that. Equity. I want to describe this in the context of equality. So let's start by defining equality. So equality is when we want equal, fair treatment for everyone. Remember the time when we were all sort of saying we want equal rights, women, gender equality, the same things that men are, doing. We want to do that as well. So equality, we want the same thing. It's a level playing ground. It's a fair playing ground. That's what being equal is, getting the same. But when it comes to equity, it's being able to meet people where they're at. What are their needs? When it comes to, for example, people of color, what extra support do they need to get to where they're trying to get to, when it comes to looking at, for example, in organizations, you're looking at, okay, we would like to have more people of color in positions of leadership, senior leadership. What can we do about that? Is it providing more support when it comes to programs that allow them to step into leadership positions? Is it, making sure that they're represented at the tables where decisions are being made, so that there's access to them being and sharing their leadership as well? So it is, equity is providing the need that is missing, that stepping stone, that block, because equality is assuming that our needs are exactly the same. It's assuming that what you need is the same thing that I need, and providing that for you, and not really looking at what exactly do you need? What are the things that have set you back? What are the barriers that we need to remove? What's the stepping stone that you need to get to where you need to get to, and addressing that? That's equity, really meeting people at the point in place where they are and addressing that need for them.
It makes me think a little bit about person-centered. Like it's a big kind of part of my psychotherapy training and my social work training is being person-centered. And unfortunately, a lot of our systems aren't person-centered, they're system-centered, and they're very rigid and black and white, and everyone follows these rules. But when we're supporting people, we want to be meeting them where they're at and being flexible to what they need. So
that's a beautiful analogy, Sam. Yes, being person-centered, absolutely, because all our needs are different.
Yes. Yeah, and it's about acknowledging that as well, isn't it? So for those who are listening who might really feel that desire to start being more of an ally, but they don't know where to start. How do you become a genuine ally and advocate for people of color?
I love that you said those who have a desire. There's that thing, and that's where it begins. It begins by things not sitting well with you, Sam. Being uncomfortable when you see injustices, being uncomfortable when you learn about how people of color are being treated and the lack of access there is for them. It's when you get uncomfortable and you're like, well, why is it like this? And then it leads you to wanting to understand more about, those barriers and those challenges. And the first step to take begins by educating yourself, picking up books that talk about racism, that talks about, the inequalities and the inequities that exist when it comes to race. And being in a place where you are educated, because in order for you to be an ally, in order for you to be an advocate, you've got to understand what the problems are in the first place. And when you understand the problems, then you're able to speak up, you're able to voice yourself and say, well, this is not fair based on this and the other. But I think where people shy away, where people get afraid, is when they do not have the information, when they do not know what the issues are, the problems are, or they're afraid of making a mistake because they haven't done the work. In other words, they haven't invested in educating themselves. And education can take different forms for all of us. It could be listening to a podcast like this one. It could be reading a book. It could be watching a movie. It could be any form of, consumption of material that resonates with you. It doesn't have to be something that's necessarily really, really difficult. It can be something that really resonates with you and comes naturally to you in how you consume information. And right now, I think we're living in times where this kind of information is so broadly available. I think it's up to us to make the decision to start educating ourselves.
And do you have, I'll put this in the show notes, are there any books in particular that you would recommend starting with?
There are a number of wonderful books to start educating yourself with. One of the books that I highly recommend is a book by Emmanuel Acho, and it's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And I just love Emmanuel's style because he comes from a very compassionate perspective and how he shares the information. And although it's very American based, I think it's such a good place to start to learn, because that's where we're seeing the most brutality. That's where we're seeing the most, Black lives really, being oppressed. And so that's a good place to start when we are trying to learn. And I guess for ourselves as Australians, the information is there, the data is there, but not as much as it is widely available in America. So it's a good place to start. And it's a really easy to read book. It's not something that's complex. It's not too big or too long, but it's a really good starting point.
Even the title, just kind of sparks my interest a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about, do you think it also is kind of educating ourselves on the history and maybe understanding a little bit like the experiences that people of color have been through as well, and some of the trauma and things like that?
The history is everything, understanding what are those discontents. Where has this discontent come from? Why are we living in this way? Why is this happening? Where is the history of all that? And I think when you understand even our Australian history when it comes to, the white Australian policy, 1901, when we think about the stolen generation, it's understanding our history. Where did this come from? Why? And when you understand the history, you're in a better position to do something in the times that we're now living in, so that you're not a carrier of what's happened in the past, that it ends with you, so to speak, in your sphere of influence.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I studied social work. I started studying when I was quite young. I was only 18. And we did a whole unit in Aboriginal studies. There's actually like a school of Aboriginal studies at Curtin University, which is completely run by Aboriginal people. And it was so, I have to say, it was so confronting for me as like a 19-year-old to learn about the history of what Aboriginal people have experienced and all the trauma. Because, what's really interesting, I had not learnt any of that at school. No one had taught. So it was a complete shock for me as a young person and very confronting. But I'm so glad that I did learn that history, because it's definitely been able to shape the way that I support people. But also now as a mum, like my daughter is so curious about history, and I can tell her the truth, even though it's really hard. I'm glad that I know those things about our history.
I think it's really surprising, Sam, that this history is not taught in school.
I know.
In Australian
it's
school,
shocking.
it's just absolutely shocking that we wouldn't teach about such things that have made us who we are today. And it's an important teaching to be learning that at 18, 19. And that's something you opted into, had you not taken that path, it's something that you probably still wouldn't know about. I think it's just incredibly important, because how do we then understand and come together and undo, not so much undo the past, because history is history, but do better? How do we do better if we don't know our history?
And understand the way trauma, I guess, I understand very well the way trauma gets passed down from generation to generation. And so do you think, like, as a mum, for me, I'm still very much working on, trying to be an ally in the best way that I can. But one thing that I really focus on is educating my daughter. And, we've got books on racism, and she actually is very interested and likes to read about these topics. Do you think that that's part of being an ally, educating our children? And do you have any strategies or tools around that?
Yes. Absolutely. I think it is fundamental as we are learning this, that we're passing it on to the next generation. And for those of us who are blessed to be parents, it is such an important role that we can play in teaching our children. So yes, absolutely, when it comes to providing them with books, and not just teaching them about racism, but going beyond that and just providing books from diverse authors, for them to be able to see other things that look different from them, other children who look different and sound different. So when it comes to books, having a variety of books so that they're learning about Africa and Asia and India and all sorts of, different places that is different from them. When it comes to toys as well, we get toys that only show one particular group of people, the dominant group. So making that conscious decision, being very intentional as a mom, as a parent, that we're going to buy a variety of toys that have different colors and different backgrounds, so that we are showcasing that. And so it's not only just teaching them about racism, but it's also teaching them the different cultures and the different aspects, and that makes it really fun and interesting for them. And choosing the things, the cartoons or the movies that they're watching, try and look for those that have that, like Moana, and the different kind of themes that are coming through with the different cultures. I think it's so rich and beautiful, because once children begin to become aware of that, we are bringing them up in a way where they are more inclusive in how they think and how they interact. So absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's something for me as a white woman. I have to be really proactive with that because I
Yes.
grew up with mostly, the authors that I loved as a child. It was very much, all white children and white women and white families. And so if I just naturally, teach my daughter using all the same things that I love, then she's going to have a
Mhm.
very kind of narrow perspective on the world. So it's like bringing that stuff into your awareness as well, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I've had to do the same thing
Yeah.
for myself too, Sam.
Yeah.
Having called Australia, as I said, home for over 20 years,
Yeah.
my ways have become very Australian.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to the books that I have been consuming, I had to do an audit of
Yeah.
my books
Yeah.
and see who are the authors, and the
Yeah.
majority, a vast majority of the authors were just white authors, and
Yeah.
they're great books. But again, for me, even as a Black woman,
Mm.
I was not consuming from a diverse range of authors, and now I
Yeah.
intentionally do that. I intentionally look at material that I want to research, that I want to
Mm.
read, that I want to consume, and I first ask myself, well, who's the author? Who do I want to be learning from?
Yes.
Because a key thing that comes up when I'm teaching this work, Sam, is who built it, or who created it, and who was it
Mm-hmm.
built for.
Yes.
Because if it is just a certain group of people who are building or putting something together, they are
Mm-hmm.
doing it for a group just
Yeah.
like them. And so the story just continues to go ahead and
Yeah.
repeat itself over and over again.
Yes. Yeah. It's all about awareness and asking ourselves those questions, isn't it? Um,
Absolutely, absolutely. And
yeah.
also when it comes to convenience, because sometimes the convenient thing to do is to walk into a Target or a Kmart and go like, I'm going to grab that for my child, or
Yeah.
I'm going to get it's there. It's really convenient. Sometimes when
Mm-hmm.
you're choosing to do things differently, and in fact, being an ally and
Mm-hmm.
an advocate requires you sometimes to take the longer route, to take
Yeah.
the way that hasn't been,
Yeah.
normally taken. So sometimes it's just going online and ordering that book. It might take a few weeks to get to you,
Yeah.
but you are supporting a particular kind of business, and you know that you're getting that book that you couldn't get from your local store.
Mm.
Or even questioning your local store and going, hey, we're not having, there are not
Yeah.
many books diverse, and getting them to
Yeah.
start thinking about that.
Yes. And it's also like I was just thinking about it. It's not that easy to find dolls with diversity,
No,
is there? Is it
no.
like, yeah, I tried to buy these beautiful Aboriginal dolls,
Mhm.
but they sold out. Like this amazing woman makes them all by hand, and they sold out straight away. And then I was looking, and I was like, it's actually like really, really hard to find.
Yes, it
Um,
is. It
which
is.
is,
And
yeah,
it's our job as well, Sam, to, when we go to stores, to
mm,
ask, is this being stocked? We would
mm,
like to see
yeah,
some of this. This is the things that I want my children to, to play with and to have as part of their, library of toys. So these are the things that we
mm,
can also do as consumers. We can begin
yeah.
to question those people who are providing, our service providers, to do better.
Yeah, I love that. And so, what mindset tips and tools would you recommend for someone who desires to be more of an ally, but perhaps has fears around getting it wrong? And I think
Mhm.
like this question is very much based on my personal experience,
Yeah.
especially on social media. That I think there can often be a fear that, if you use the wrong word or you say something wrong, you're going to offend someone. And
Hmm.
I wonder if that sometimes, makes people, very focused inwards rather than actually focusing on the help, because that fear
Yes.
of getting it wrong almost, causes
Yeah.
people to freeze instead of taking action.
I have found that
Mm,
with a lot of my clients who have
mm,
come on to work with me, they
yeah.
have done so because of I subscribe to the motto
Hmm.
of calling in rather than
Hmm.
calling out.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
we live in a culture where there's so much cancel
Hmm.
culture where, oh,
Hmm.
you said this, we're going to call you out, and it's
Yeah.
done in such a way that is super confronting to somebody who's
Hmm.
perhaps just dipping their toe
Yes.
into the waters of beginning to speak up. And I
Yeah.
think it's important where we can to call people in, because calling in is you're being compassionate about it. You're not really like being vicious and attacking, so to speak.
Yes.
But I also think that we've got to be brave. You've got to go in knowing that I don't know everything. I'm going to make mistakes. Like that little kid who's learning how to ride a bike, they've got to have courage to get on the bike and pedal, and knowing that I will fall down, but I will get up again. That kid who's learning how to crawl, knowing that I am going to stumble a million times before I can make those steps. So I think it's coming to grips with the fact that I will make a mistake. I may get called out, or I may get called in, but this is work that is so important to me and my values that I would rather make a mistake than be silent. And that's what I'm finding more and more about the women and the businesses who come and work with me. They're saying, you know what, Annie, I'd rather make some noise. I'd rather, speak up with the intention of wanting to do good than be silent, because, silence is very much a product of fear. And fear is the currency that is used when it comes to racial inequity, when it comes to racism and a lack of representation. It's what keeps people at bay. Silence, that fear of making a mistake. And when that happens, there's no progress, nothing, there's no activity taking place, and that keeps things the same. Nothing changes. And so we ourselves have got to make that decision of, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit brave and I'm going to move forward, because me being silent is more harmful than me speaking up and making a mistake. And I choose to make a difference by speaking up.
That's so powerful, Annie. And I think that applies to lots of different areas of life, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Silence is more harmful than speaking up. And, I know for me, sometimes when I speak up and I don't feel confident, I can come across a bit clumsy, or it can feel clumsy, but I've always still been really pleased that I did raise something rather than stay silent. I think that's really helpful. And have you got any other kind of mindset tips or tools, or particular journaling prompts, or anything that might support the women listening to this podcast to really empower themselves to be more of an ally?
Yes, I think it's questioning certain things that make you uncomfortable. Why am I uncomfortable with that? So I'm afraid of making a mistake. Why? Get underneath that why. Well, because I might be called out and that would be really embarrassing, or that would really crush my spirit. Okay, why? And then getting underneath that why, to the point where after you're done with the why, what's the worst thing possible here for you? What's a worst case scenario? So maybe a few people don't like you. So maybe it establishes the people who are not for this work and those who are. It's really being in a position where you just peel those layers of the why and the why and the why until you get to the core of, you know what, this work is too important for me to be silent. And for those who are caregivers to little ones, or parents, this work is so important, because the legacy that I am passing on, I want the next generation that I am raising to do better, so that this is not an issue 30, 40 years from now, that we are actually getting closer to a point where equity is actually being realized, and we're seeing a lot more representation across the board. So I think it's just that questioning of the why and getting to the core.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I think that's, just a really, really supportive tool, and so because the women listening to Permission To, some of them are small business owners, but some of them aren't. If people are interested in working with you and learning from you around this stuff, how can they get in touch, and how can they work with you? What are the different opportunities there?
Sure. If you would love to work with me, I have a program called Represented. And it is an online program that allows you to, build a culturally and racially diverse, inclusive, and equitable business. But also, it is such a great tool in a program to help you understand, the barriers and the challenges that people of color face. It allows you to do that personal audit, to really look at your life and say, okay, why has it been this way for me? What are the attitudes that I've picked up? What are the biases? What are the prejudices that I have formed, since growing up? And it's such a great program that allows you to go really deep into your own upbringing, into how things have kind of shaped the person that you are. And then it provides you with the tools to, okay, how can I change this? How can I undo this in a way that serves me and my values for where I am right now? So Represented is the course that does that. And in addition, if you're just in the beginning stages and you just want to do better, I have a PDF document, which is how to become a genuine ally for people of color. And it's 10 steps. And it just walks you through, 1, 2, 3, up to 10, what you can do to indeed be that genuine ally and advocate for people of color. So those are 2 ways in which, you can begin to do the work.
Thank you, Annie. And do you feel like even if someone's not a small business owner, that your course Represented might still be really powerful for them to use in their workplace or something? Or is it really for small business owners?
I think, and very much based on the feedback of the people who have taken this on, a number of amazing women, is that this is applicable to anyone, whether you're a business owner or not, because it's just about the understanding. The understanding piece is what is missing. Why are these barriers there? Why are there these challenges? What is facing people of color? I want to understand that, and I want to do better. How can I do better? And it gives you the tools to do that, whether you're in business or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just thinking, I could imagine, managers of not-for-profits and, smaller organizations where they might not have anyone in that role, or there'd be so many people that would benefit from this. So
absolutely. Even the stay-at-home mums who are like, corporate is a little bit behind me now. I don't have a business right now. I'm just focusing on raising the next generation, and that's what I'm doing. This is such a powerful program to help you really understand that. And it's a mix of people who come into this program. It's a mix, those who are in business, those who are in corporate, and those who are just, mums who are raising the next generation. And I think it's such a good mix that allows us to learn from each other in different ways.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's very confronting to learn this, but again, in my social work, I had to unpack this a lot. We all have biases. We might think that we don't, but it's actually impossible not to. So I think it's so wonderful that you are guiding people through that process and then helping them actually take the action steps to do better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you. I'm so grateful for you for giving your time to my community for this podcast, but just in general for what you're doing for the world. I think you're making the world a better place. So thank you, Annie.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. It's been an absolute pleasure.